Okay, so we're entering kind of the wrap-up stage of our summit. We have firstly President of the Tertiary Education Union, Sandra Grey, to give her reflections and her perspectives in terms of the election and education, and finally Max will help wrap up the whole thing. And then we'll have afternoon tea, and then we'll have our session afterwards. And thank you to the students who have come along from Victoria and Matthew. It's good to see you here. And we will, of course, put all these videos up on YouTube on Monday, hopefully as well, so people can look back as well. So Sandra Grey also has been involved with education for quite a while as a staff member, most recently in Victoria, also as a postgraduate student while in Australia, and has a long involvement in researching and being involved with activism and community groups. She is also currently the spokesperson for the Campaign for MMP group, among other things. So please welcome Sandra Grey.
Well, I tell you what, it is nice to come somewhere to hear people talking about politics. Because you turn on the television, well, at the moment you do see a political issue. You see oil on television at the moment, a lot, and that is a very political issue. But also, primarily what we've seen over the last few weeks, of course, is nothing to do with politics, but a lot to do with rugby. You know, so it's, it is kind of worrying that we have really pushed out of our minds the fact that we are, and Dave will know this very well, and I know it very well because of Campaign for MMP duties, 43 days away from an election. 43 days away, and you would hardly know that New Zealand has just had a credit downgrade, that there is high unemployment, in particular youth unemployment has skyrocketed 27% in the last 6 months, and that has to concern students and student associations. That we have rising inequality, and I mean these are just a few of the things that are high on the, on the agenda of things that should concern us as a nation, and we should be thinking about in these next 43 days. The difficulty, I guess, at the moment is that it's very hard to get tertiary education onto anybody's radar. We are struggling as a sector, both staff and students, to find the spaces where we can talk about our sector and the harm that has been caused to it over the last 3 years. There are very serious pressures facing our sector, and they come directly out of the government's tertiary education strategy and its drive for increased productivity and increased accountability for public expenditure. I mean, this market model that we face, and it underpins the strategy in every way, means that we have a range of disputes at our polytechnics and our universities at the moment, a range of disputes for staff that are actually going to undermine the essence of what universities are about and the essence of what vocational training is about. As I look around and I watch members of our union from around the country arrive today for a council meeting, I think we can say that the current government's approach to higher education and vocational training has pushed tertiary education, the tertiary education sector to its capacity, and it is actually starting to crumble in front of us. I think what we need to do is convince people to refocus the lens. I think we need to convince governments to do this. I think we need to convince all political parties to do this. We don't need them to do what National is doing in education and focus on, the 3 R's, reading, writing and arithmetic. Their focus on national standards at primary education isn't what we need right now. It isn't going to make education better. What we need is to look at what I'd say the 3 P's are of public education. We need all parties to consider public funding, public control and public participation. And no, I didn't collude with Dave Clendon on this speech, even though I am going to talk about public participation and the public nature of tertiary education. I think in the last few decades we have seen an ongoing attack of tertiary education sector and on the idea that it is actually a public good. So first to public funding, there is no doubt when you look at the figures around now that we have seen a decrease in tertiary education funding over the last 3 years. And in fact, I brought a couple of charts with me that Stephen Day, our communications officer, put together for our union members to show this. And it very clearly shows from Treasury figures just how big the gap is and will get. In fact, Treasury figures show that because the government is not inflation-proofing the funding of the tertiary sector, so that the costs are not being kept up with in terms of funding. The gap by 2014 is $1.1 billion in what is needed to run our institutions and what they are actually receiving from the government. $1.1 billion. Well, how do you recover $1.1 billion in the tertiary education sector? You close programs, you fire staff, you increase the number of students in classrooms, you decrease the resources on campus, you take away tutorials, you move to online learning. These are all trends you will have all experienced. As students, even in the short time many of you have probably been in the tertiary sector, you have probably seen these things taken away from you. So the government is putting in less investment and they are actually expecting more out of the sector. So they are not prepared to put more money into the sector, but they certainly want more out of us. They want more productivity. And in fact, you know, this drive for more bang for their buck is actually unjustified and unnecessary in the tertiary sector. If you're asking, you know, should we redesign PBRF? Academics don't need to count up each year what publications they do. They are very highly motivated individuals who love researching. They love being involved in research projects and turning out work. They don't need a big stick over them every year to make them work on those things. But if we do look, I mean it is unnecessary, because if we look at the tertiary education sector over the last few years, the government doesn't need to squeeze any harder. They have got increased productivity. Even for hardcore econocrats, I assure you, we can show that the ongoing drive for productivity, that there has been a drive for productivity, and we have actually had it in the last few years. Staff-student ratios are one example of productivity in our sector. There are very few ways to actually evaluate productivity, but staff-student ratios are one. Have your classes got bigger? Yes, they have. Do you want to know how much by? 2 students over the last 3 years. For every staff member in New Zealand in 2009, there was, for every staff member there were 17.9 students. Today, there are 19.8 students to every staff member. Now, it doesn't sound a lot to people, but I assure you that makes an immense difference. In the time that I worked at Victoria University, it meant I went from having tutorials of about 16 students to tutorials of 22 to 25. That's less time I can devote to actually doing my job, which is teaching, which is inspiring people to learn, which is giving them feedback on their assignments and actually taking the time to get to know students. So increased productivity is costing us, and that is the thing I guess we do need to know as staff and students. In terms of our institutions and what the government care about, it is cost as well. New Zealand institutions have gone down in international rankings. They have gone down because the quality is being attacked by this drive for productivity, because one of the things that universities are ranked on internationally is their staff-student ratio, as well as other measures. And both in the QS World Rankings and in the Times Higher Education rankings that have been released over the last few months, New Zealand institutions are slipping internationally. And that matters to you as students, and it matters to us as a country. There are problems, however, with those sorts of measures, but I can point to a whole lot of other ways it is costing. In terms of staff, it has mattered. And Dave's right. While we are often seen as those terrible people that make you do assignments, our conditions of employment are your conditions of learning. If we are not able to do our job properly, you will not have a good education experience. And our staff, our members, the staff at both universities and polytechnics are seeing huge attacks on their core conditions, the conditions under which they work, which are affecting them in terms of their job and how well they do it. There has been a rise in insecure and precarious work and a decline in morale on campuses. And this is a very genuine and problematic thing. If we think about the sector, the tertiary education sector runs on goodwill. It runs on staff going beyond the call of duty. And I assure you there are a lot of staff out there now who don't want to give. And the people who will miss out are the future students in those institutions. So in terms of students, I also think that we are seeing some decline in the things that matter to students, the time and effort that all of the staff can put into making sure the experience of being in an educational institution is a good experience. So we need more public funding into the sector, there is no doubt about that. We need genuine acknowledgement from all political parties that a good tertiary education system is one that is publicly funded, but the second thing is one that's under public control. And that's something that I think we, both as staff and students, have seen a decline in recent years as well. In the last 2.5 years, we've seen a real attack on this element of publicness in the public tertiary education sector. This national government, of course, removed staff and student representation from polytechnic councils and made sure that ministerial appointments were made as the majority of the council appointments. And you might think, well, that's a bit removed from what students need to care about. Well, of course, it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference whether the people in those councils are staff and students who care about the institution or whether they're just another generic set of managers who are looking to increase productivity. If our public institutions are truly public, they should be owned by us, the people of New Zealand, and controlled by us. And we should be taking responsibility, and in fact, you know, community, it's shown that communities will take responsibility for good quality public education. They have in past, and I hope we can in future. And the final part of the public for me is public participation. And I think we do have to acknowledge that what we see in a tertiary education sector under strain is one where a lot of people are now starting to miss out. They are not even getting through the doors of our polytechnics and our universities. When I look at the rising cost of fees, I do know, even with student loans available, I know there are students who just will not get a chance to learn. I also am a little bit disturbed always, and in part it's because I was a second chance learner myself. I returned to university, or I went to university for the first time at the age 25, so I guess it always strikes a chord with me when I see policies that contravene this kind of idea that we have lifelong learning. But the national government's tertiary education strategy is actually excluding a whole lot of people, and particularly second chance learners, from the opportunity to get a good education. Why? Because they're concentrating on people from the ages of 18 to 25, and lots of you are in that category. And I think it's fantastic that you are getting the opportunity now to study. But why are they giving you the opportunity and others not? Well, because they have figured out they'll get more economic gain out of you getting a qualification than someone who is over 25. It's as simple as that. There is no real justification for closing down our institutions to second chance learners. So I do think we should all be concerned with that. And you never know, you might want to return and do something else with your life later in life. But you may be denied that opportunity if this government continues doing what it is doing and denying access. The other part about it, I guess, in terms of access is regional access, and this particularly concerns those in the polytechnic sector. We have seen huge amounts of money taken out of the polytechnic sector in the last few years. This government has removed $50 million out of polytechnics. Now that matters when you live in Whangarei or Kaitaia and they're closing down your local institution and your local course. Now people say, well, they can just go and move to another city and do their degree. That's not an option, or their studies. That's not an option for every New Zealander to up and leave their home community, and they shouldn't have to. We should value those regional institutions. So I guess this election, you know, the members of our union, the staff working at the institutions, and I hope the students, and I'm sure you are, I think we should all be going out and saying, you know, this is an important issue, tertiary education. Public funding, public control and public participation are all justifiable. But it's a hard road because, in fact, for a long time, we have seen this eaten away at by the idea that learning is a private good only. And I'm not going to deny that there are private goods you get out of being a person with a tertiary education. I have experienced some of those. I have a very well-paid job. I have many more opportunities now because I have a PhD than I would have had I continued on having left school at 17 with very few formal qualifications. So there are private benefits that I get. But I assure you, there are many public benefits that society gets from all of us being more highly skilled and highly educated. And the government says, you know, we know these things exist, the national government will admit this, and there are documents that show, you know, yeah, we know there are goods beyond the economic gains that our society gets out of students being more highly trained and more highly skilled and having higher degrees. But they say, but we can't measure those things. So let's just not worry about them at all and concentrate on the thing we can measure, which is how much people will learn when they're trained. I think we as a public need to say, actually, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. We know how important it is to have, you know, our families, our friends, our children, our parents engaged in education and lifelong learning. And we, the staff and students, are going to have to stand up and say this and say it loudly. We need to convince the government, the current government, the National Party. We need to work less hard, but we still need to work on all other political parties and say, make tertiary education an important public priority. Not just for us, certainly it is about our future, all of us, but also for our families, for our whānau, for our communities, and for our New Zealand, for Aotearoa. It is crucial that we actually put some money into the sector, put some public control back into the sector, and move away from a ridiculous model that values only one thing out of education, and that is economic gain. Because I assure you, we keep going down this road, very few people will get a good quality education in the future, and our public institutions will be completely undervalued by everyone, including the potential students. It's not going to be easy to convince the government, but if it is a public good, and I would argue there is no doubt in my head, you know, it's why I'm committed to being a teacher and a learner at the same time, to being a scholar. There is a public good in what we do. So, let's make sure we convince the public and political parties this election it's time they invested in their future.